And we are back. It's kind of crazy to think Trudeau is stepping down
Yeah,
the Canadian political scene.
it's gonna be
It's going to be a
a
whole different ballgame.
whole different game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like we're all kind of like waiting to see who's going to be the next big star.
Yeah.
Kind of like the political off-season just ended, and we're all waiting to see who's going to hit the ice right, eh?
Exactly. The race for prime minister is heating up, and this time around we've got a mix of familiar faces and some intriguing newcomers. It's not just a matter of who wants the job, but who can withstand the scrutiny and the baggage that comes with it.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we've been following all the news, every twist and turn. But maybe before we get too into the weeds, we should do a quick rundown of the key players for our listener.
Absolutely.
What do you say?
Let's start with the Liberal side, where the race to fill Trudeau's shoes is already quite crowded.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some seasoned veterans like Freeland,
Of course.
Christy Clark,
Yeah.
Melanie Joly, and Anita Anand, all formidable contenders with their own strengths and weaknesses. No skeletons in the closet as far as we know,
Right.
which is always a good start in politics these days, right?
You said it. A clean slate is a rare commodity in this game.
Definitely.
But things get a little spicier when we look at some of the other Liberal contenders. What about Dominic LeBlanc? He's been around the block a few times and knows how the game's played, but he's also had his share of controversies.
Exactly. LeBlanc faced some scrutiny over a fishing license granted to a company with family ties. It raised questions about potential conflicts of interest, even though no charges were ever filed. It'll be interesting to see how he navigates that narrative if he decides to throw his hat in the ring.
Sure. And then there's Francois-Philippe Champagne, another seasoned politician with a bit of a question mark hanging over his head.
Right.
Those mortgages he had with the Bank of China back in the day certainly raised some eyebrows,
They did.
even though they were repaid in 2017, and there were, again, no charges.
It highlights a point that's often overlooked. Public perception matters just as much as legality in politics. Even the appearance of impropriety can be damaging, especially in a leadership race.
Yeah, it's all about trust, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Voters want to know that the person leading the country has their best interests at heart and that they're not beholden to any special interests.
Oh.
Speaking of interesting, let's talk about the elephant in the room, shall we? Mark Carney.
Oh.
He's the guy everyone's buzzing about.
Big name.
Former Bank of Canada governor, big name in international finance. He's got the resume, but is that enough?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
On paper, Carney looks like the ideal candidate: experience, charisma, global recognition.
For sure.
But his association with Brookfield Asset Management is drawing criticism from environmental groups.
Okay.
There are allegations that Brookfield might have underreported their carbon emissions, which is a pretty serious charge in this day and age.
Underreporting carbon emissions.
Well,
That's like greenwashing on steroids. It's interesting because Carney himself is a huge advocate for sustainable investment.
he is.
He's been pushing for financial reforms to address climate change. But if a company he's associated with is fudging their numbers, that could be a major blow to his credibility.
Absolutely. And it doesn't end there. There are reports linking Brookfield to offloading lands connected to deforestation and even human rights abuses.
Really?
It's a tangled web, and it raises some serious questions about whether Carney's actions align with his rhetoric.
Yeah, it's giving some people pause. I mean, how do you reconcile being a champion for sustainability while being linked to a company that's potentially engaging in some shady environmental practices?
It's a complex issue, and it's one that voters will have to grapple with. It highlights the need to look beyond the surface, to examine the track records and affiliations of these potential leaders. It's not just about what they say, but what they do.
Okay, so we've covered the Liberal side. Let's shift gears and talk about the other major players who might be eyeing the prime minister's seat.
Okay.
What's happening over in conservative land?
Well, on the conservative side, the front-runner appears to be Pierre Poilievre.
Okay.
He's a vocal critic of the current government, especially when it comes to economic policy. Poilievre's known for his fiery speeches and his strong stance against the World Economic Forum.
Oh, yeah.
Or WEF.
The WEF, yeah, that's become a bit of a political lightning rod lately.
Mm-hmm.
For those of our listeners who might not be totally familiar with it, what exactly is the WEF and why is it relevant to this discussion?
The WEF is essentially a big annual gathering in Davos, Switzerland, where political leaders, business executives, and academics come together to discuss global issues. It's been around for decades, but it's become increasingly controversial in recent years. Some people see it as a forum for collaboration and problem solving, while others view it as a symbol of elitism and globalist agendas.
So where does Poilievre fit into all of this?
Poilievre is firmly in the skeptical of the WEF camp. He sees it as a threat to Canadian sovereignty and has pledged to prevent Canadian officials from attending WEF events if he becomes prime minister.
That's a pretty bold stance. It seems like the WEF is going to be a major point of contention in this election.
It seems like
But it's not just Poilievre who has strong opinions about it. We were talking earlier about Justin Trudeau and Freeland, both of whom have ties to the WEF.
Absolutely. Trudeau has attended Davos multiple times and aligns with many WF priorities, particularly on issues like climate change and global trade. Freeland is even more deeply involved. She sits on the WF Board of Trustees and participates in discussions about global governance, which essentially refers to how nations cooperate to address global challenges.
So we've got Trudeau and Freeland, who are engaged with the WEF, and Poilievre, who's vehemently opposed to it. That's a pretty stark contrast. Where does that leave someone like Mark Carney?
Right.
He's got that international finance background and has been vocal about global issues. But then there are those questions surrounding Brookfield and its environmental practices.
It's a delicate balancing act for Carney. He's walking a tightrope between his globalist leanings and the need to appeal to a Canadian electorate that's increasingly wary of international institutions. His stance on the WEF and how he addresses those Brookfield controversies could be a defining moment in his campaign.
Okay, so we've got a good handle on the Liberal side, and we've touched on Poilievre and the Conservatives. What about the NDP?
Yeah.
Are they going to be a factor in this election?
Well, Jagmeet Singh has been leading the NDP for several years now, and while they haven't formed a government, they've been a vocal opposition party. Singh has been particularly outspoken about foreign interference in Canadian politics, especially when it comes to allegations of the Indian government's involvement in some Canadian criminal activities.
Yeah.
It's a sensitive issue and one that could resonate with voters concerned about national security.
Right, and it's also worth noting that Singh, unlike Trudeau, Freeland, or Carney, doesn't have any apparent ties to the WEF. So he might be able to position himself as an outsider, someone who's not beholden to these international organizations.
That could be a strategic advantage, especially if the WEF continues to be a source of controversy.
So to recap, we've got a crowded field of potential contenders for prime minister, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, and baggage. We've got controversies surrounding conflicts of interest,
Yes.
questionable financial dealings and environmental practices, and then there's this whole WEF debate, which is adding another layer of complexity to the political landscape.
It's a lot to unpack, and we've only just scratched the surface. But it's important to remember that this is just the beginning. The campaign trail is long, and there are bound to be more surprises and twists along the way.
It's going to be a wild ride, that's for sure.
And for our listener, this is just a taste of what's to come. We'll be diving deeper into these issues and exploring the nuances of the Canadian political landscape in the upcoming episodes.
So buckle up and get ready for an exciting election season.
It's going to be a good one. This WEF thing. It's fascinating how it's becoming like a key dividing line in this election. It's almost like two different visions for Canada's place in the world, you know?
It's true. On one side, you have those who see the value in engaging with global institutions like the WEF, advocating for international cooperation on issues like climate change and economic development.
And on the other, you've got those who are more inward-looking, who believe that Canada should prioritize its own interests and be wary of getting entangled in what they perceive as globalist agendas.
Exactly. And, you know, when you think about it, this has major implications for climate policy. For example, Trudeau, with his strong ties to the WEF, has championed carbon pricing as a key tool to reduce emissions. He's positioned himself as a global leader on climate action, pushing for international agreements and collaboration.
But Poilievre, on the other hand, has been a vocal critic of carbon taxes. He argues that they hurt working families and do little to actually address climate change, especially if other countries aren't pulling their weight.
It's a real clash of ideologies for sure.
Yeah.
And it's likely to be a major battleground in the election.
Yeah.
Then you have someone like Carney who's kind of straddling both worlds.
Yeah.
He's advocated for global financial reforms to tackle climate change. But then there are those lingering questions about Brookfield's environmental practices. Does that undermine his credibility on this issue?
It definitely muddies the waters. Voters will have to decide for themselves whether they see these connections as assets or liabilities. Is it a sign of experience and global leadership, or is it evidence of being out of touch with the needs of everyday Canadians?
Exactly. It's a question that goes beyond climate policy. It touches on healthcare affordability and the economy. How these leaders see Canada's role in the world will inevitably shape their approach to domestic issues.
Absolutely. Take healthcare, for example. Canada's healthcare system is facing significant challenges, from long wait times to staffing shortages. How will these potential leaders address those issues? Will they look to international models for inspiration, or will they focus on homegrown solutions?
And on the economic front, there's growing concern about affordability and the rising cost of living. Will these leaders prioritize policies that promote economic growth, even if it means closer ties with global markets? Or will they focus on protecting Canadian jobs and industries, even if it means a more protectionist approach?
It's tough.
These are complex issues with no easy answers.
Mm.
And it's easy to get lost in the political theater,
For sure.
sound bites and the controversies.
Right.
But at the end of the day, voters are going to be looking for someone who can offer a clear vision for the future.
Someone who can inspire confidence, demonstrate competence, and articulate practical solutions to the challenges facing Canada.
Yeah.
It's not about ideology or rhetoric. It's about leadership.
Absolutely. Canadians want to know that their prime minister understands their concerns, shares their values, and is capable of steering the country through turbulent times. And that brings us back to the candidates themselves.
What are their track records? What are their priorities? What kind of Canada do they envision? Those are the questions voters will be asking as they head to the polls.
And as we delve deeper into this election, we'll be examining those questions, exploring the nuances of the Canadian political landscape, and helping our listeners navigate this complex and ever-evolving story.
So much more to discuss. But for now, let's leave our listener with this. The choices we make as citizens have a profound impact on the direction of our country.
So stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, stay curious. Yeah, it really does feel like we're at a crossroads.
Yeah,
Like we're about to choose our own adventure as a nation,
it does.
and the stakes are high.
For sure. It all boils down to trust and judgment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Canadians want a leader who they believe will make good decisions, who will stand up for their interests, and who will represent Canada on the world stage with integrity and vision.
Absolutely. And, that's where all this stuff comes in. The WEFs, the controversies, the policy positions. It's like pieces of a puzzle.
It is?
And voters have to figure out what picture they want to make.
Yeah, it's about connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Looking beyond the headlines and the sound bites and really trying to understand what these candidates stand for, what their values are, and how their past actions might inform their future decisions.
It's true. It's like we're all political detectives
Exactly.
trying to figure out who did it,
Yeah.
And it's not just about the big picture stuff either. It's about the smaller details, the things that give you a sense of their character and their temperament.
Right. How do they handle pressure? How do they respond to criticism? How do they treat people who disagree with them?
Yeah.
These are all important things to think about.
Definitely, because at the end of the day, we're not just choosing a policy platform.
Yeah.
We're choosing a person.
We are.
And that person is going to be representing Canada on the world stage.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, they're going to be the face of our nation, the voice of our values.
It's a big responsibility.
Yeah, I'd say the stakes are pretty high.
It's a reminder that democracy is a participatory sport. It's not just about casting a ballot every few years. It's about staying engaged, asking tough questions, and holding our leaders accountable.
For sure. And hey, maybe this deep dive got you thinking or give you some new questions.
I hope so.
Maybe you're even thinking about getting more involved in politics.
Yeah.
It's your country, your future. Get out there and make your voice heard.
That's what it's all about. Engaging in the great debate, sharing your perspectives, and contributing to the shaping of our nation.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into who could be the next prime minister.
I think so.
It's been a wild ride, and we're just getting started.
Definitely. We'll be back soon with more deep dives, more insights, and more analysis to help you understand Canadian politics.
Don't forget to comment below and let us know what you think, and subscribe for more deep dives. See you next time.